going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 201, and I had a conversation with Christian Barth. He wrote The Garden State Parkway Murders, a cold case mystery, about the murders of Elizabeth Perry and Susan Davis. They are unsolved murders, and it's a really excellent book. He goes down a whole lot of rabbit holes of possible suspects and motives and things. It was a really great read. Brought up a lot of questions. Really turns you into a detective while you're reading it. I felt like that. I, of course, as you know, am, from listening to other episodes, I'm really fascinated by serial killers. And so for me, it was really interesting to read this book and delve in and try and figure out who might have done it. I was trying to figure out which episode to put out this week. There's so much going on, and I have a few episodes in the hopper and that are, upcoming. And there was a part of me that thought, well, God, is it even appropriate to put on an episode? I don't know. There's so much happening with the coronavirus and everyone's stressed and on their last nerves. And I don't know. I don't know what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, but I do think normalcy is appropriate. So I'm trying to be normal, and the normal thing to do is to have an episode. So that's what I'm doing. I am stressed on certain days, and some days I'm not. It's been a real ebb and flow. A lot of stuff going on. I'm waiting on results for my brother, sister-in-law, and niece and nephew. They are all quarantined right now, self-isolating, I should say, and they're waiting for test results because my sister-in-law had a dry cough, and my niece is experiencing fever, and just as a precautionary measure, they have been locked down. And, it's stressful. It's a big unknown right now for everybody, not just with my family, but for everybody. Yeah, so lots going on. Please check on your friends and neighbors by phone, because definitely practice the self-isolation thing. Stay home unless you have to go out. Make sure you practice the social distancing and all that. I went for a walk, and it was really interesting watching people's behaviors, because folks would step off the curb or really give me a wide breadth, and I'd give them a wide breadth, and everyone's really trying to do their part. But check on your friends who maybe don't do so well with isolation. This is certainly a time for folks with depression to really struggle. We're all in this together. We're going to get through this. I know we are. And this is so new and weird, and none of us really know how to deal with it. But there are some very, very smart people trying to figure out how to help us. And, we can help each other, staying positive and happy. I've been trying to find good news in all of this, and I've been posting it on my Hey Human Podcast Facebook page. So if you're looking for some good stuff, please go there and check it out, and maybe spread some good news. Feel free to share all that stuff, because I think we need all the happiness we can get right now. The usual stuff. Social media, Hey Human Podcast is on Instagram and Facebook. Susan Ruthism is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I'm trying to post a lot of funny stuff and really do some engaging things on my social media, my personal social media. Again, I do believe we're all in this together, and we have to keep lifting each other up, or else we may go mad from the unknown. What is it? The great quote from Dune. Fear. Frank Herbert said, "Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death." I've always loved that quote, and I think it's very true. Yeah, so if you feel like emailing me, please do so. Maybe you're bored at home and you're like, you know what? I've always meant to email Susan and I have never done it. Now is the time. Please do. Susan@heyhumanpodcast.com. Please go out there and support artists and creatives and your local businesses and things. Get people's records, buy their books. If you have shops and restaurants in your neighborhood, buy gift certificates online for them. And then as soon as all this madness is over, you can redeem them. But maybe if we all do that kind of stuff, it'll help keep some of these small businesses afloat. It's really times like this where I feel like humankind, emphasis on kind, really shows up. I believe in us. I think we can do it. So, okay, without further ado, let's get to the Garden State Parkway Murders, a cold case mystery conversation with Christian Barth. You can find this book on Amazon. Of course, I have all the links on heyhumanpodcast.com on the links page. Definitely check that out. Rate and review Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You've probably got a lot of time on your hands right now, so do a deep dive. There's 201 episodes and a lot of different kinds of people and interesting stories. So definitely check them all out. Okay, let's get into this. Thanks for listening. Here we go. Christian Barth, welcome to Hey Human.
Thank you so much for having me. I greatly, greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. How did we get connected? Now I'm...
My high school friend / manager, Lisa Black.
That's right.
Had connected us, set us up, if you will.
That's right.
On this journey.
Yeah, Lisa's great. She's a kick in the pants, as they say, as the cool kids say.
The cool kids. Lisa, I was one of those cool kids in high school. I'm not a cool kid now.
Yeah.
Lisa always says I wasn't nice to her in high school. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Were you a mean girl?
I was a mean girl, big time. I've since recovered, but I was one of those. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The athlete,
jockey,
narcissistic, big man on campus, entitled boy. That was me.
How did you shuffle that coil off?
It was a matter of hard knocks in life, perspective, growth. That's how if you get knocked around, you begin to grow and you can sort of evolve, or you can devolve. I chose to evolve. I sort of shed the whole athlete thing immediately after college. I was a pretty good football player. I was contemplating trying out for some teams in the NFL. In fact, my coach asked me if I wanted to, but even by then I was sort of pivoting into a different direction that I hadn't yet really found yet, although I had done some plays. I hadn't done any writing, but I certainly knew I was an artistic person of that temperament, and I always downplayed any athletic achievements and so forth. Even to this day, I love my teams, but I'm not a sports person, so to speak, if that makes sense. Sure. I can appreciate it and I like it, but I don't go crazy over it.
Yeah, I appreciate a great game with compelling athletes, but I could care less who wins. Personally, I don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't ever have a dog in the hunt.
Sort of like the debates. The same thing. You watch them, you're like, I'll tune this off. This is just too painful.
There's a lot going on.
I know.
There's a lot going on. Well, you were raised up in
New Jersey. You mean geographically speaking?
Yeah, obviously I know more about you than my listeners, so I'm going to pull out some basic stuff first. Okay. So you grew up in New Jersey.
That's correct. Outside of Philadelphia, a town called, a suburb, really, a vast suburb called Cherry Hill, about 10 miles outside of Philadelphia.
Were there cherries there?
There were none. No, nothing like
liars.
That.
City planning liars.
Exactly. It was actually called, the moniker was Little LA for a while because it sort of developed like that. No downtown. It was practically one of the, I think it's known for having the first shopping mall in America. It was the Cherry Hill Mall. And it was the forefront of the vast developments, that came about sometime after Levittown did in New York. But that's what it was. It was a nice place to grow up, but it didn't have that small town appeal or Village Green, where I live now up in Connecticut, has one of those New Englandy feels to it with the churches and congregational churches and so forth.
Were you out of college? What did you study in college, firstly?
Political science.
Did you? Yeah.
I chose that, and I don't know how many years that ago, because, believe it or not, it was a very small liberal arts college, Hampton-Sydney College. Whose most famous graduate, there were only 900 of us, is actually a very famous Hollywood director now, believe it or not. I didn't know him. Scott Cooper.
From your year?
No, he was actually a freshman when I was a senior, but I don't remember him. So that's where I went to undergrad. And I will meander periodically, so feel free to bring me back as I digress.
Okay. What drew you to the profession of law?
Back to the poli-sci major. I chose that because there wasn't a thesis. So it was that or history. So you could see I was very motivated to succeed. And then my father was a lawyer, and he had loved the practice of law. He was just lived by it. And my late father, that is, he had his own practice. In fact, the firm I work for now, when I was interviewed, one of the guys knew my dad, and he said he was the last of the gentleman lawyers, who fit that mold completely. He was very much like Atticus Finch in that way, and I always thought, well, I don't know what else I'm going to do with a poli-sci degree, because I certainly couldn't get a job elsewise, and I sort of wanted to be an actor. Went out to your neck of the woods for a year, lived in the hills, took classes, and really, really enjoyed it, but just didn't have a thick enough skin or a maturity level that you would need in order to succeed at any level out there. So I decided to go to law school, and that's what I did.
Well, I think lawyers use acting skills.
They do if they're trial lawyers. I'm not a trial lawyer. I suppose there's a performance aspect to it. I found you get through something, and then you can evaluate at the other end sort of how you've been synthesized. And I'm a far smarter person I was after law school than beforehand. You read so much and you learn to really distill arguments that it really does behoove you once you get into the world. It's certainly a bag of tools, I'll say that. It's a very difficult profession. I don't handle the traditional caseload. I do more of a consulting job. But it certainly, it can be very, very stressful and all those things. I sort of don't delve into that aspect of it too freely, but it's definitely a very, very valuable education in and of itself.
So what kind of lawyer are you then?
I general practice. I work for a firm called Madelman, Weinroth, and Miller on behalf of their one client, and I offer legal advice to several people on a daily basis. Draft letters, give counsel, give wisdom. Typically, I tell people sometimes, you really have to see the forest through the trees, so to speak. Sometimes it's judgment that you're imparting upon people, and wisdom, not necessarily legal advice.
And you tell them how to avoid the bag of tools.
Yes, you do that at all costs.
That's going to be a new insult that I'm going to swing around, because when you said that, it just made me think of calling someone a bag of tools.
A bag of tools.
You're being a bag of tools right now, man.
Yeah.
9 years ago, you began a process of writing your book, The Garden State Parkway Murders, and you said in the beginning that we'll talk about what that is firstly, but that it was an impactful moment in your childhood that really stuck with you as you were writing. Let's start there. Firstly, okay. The murders themselves.
Well, the murders themselves, and then we'll get back to what got me down this road. 1969, Memorial Day. It was actually on a Friday that year, before it changed officially in the early 70s to being a Monday holiday. Two girls, Susan Davis and Elizabeth Perry, both 19, were friends at a small Midwestern college no longer in existence. They had decided to travel in Susan's car, which is a blue Chevrolet convertible, go back east and stay with Susan's parents and then go with Susan's parents, the four of them, this being Susan Davis and Elizabeth Perry. Elizabeth was from Minnesota. Susan was from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The deal was they were going to meet with Susan's parents and travel down to Duke University in Durham, North Carolina to see Susan's older brother graduate from college. Before that, the plan was to go to Ocean City, New Jersey, and stay there a few days, get some sun, and then go back home and meet up with Susan's parents again for the trip down North Carolina. But sadly, that didn't happen. They never made it home from Ocean City. As far as the murders are concerned, the brief thing is they left at 4:30 a.m. on the 30th, the Friday. They were staying at a boarding house owned by Walter Seibin on 9th Street, right next to the beach. They left in Susan's convertible. Mr. Seibin saw them. Everything was great. They didn't meet many people, but they were happy, loved their landlords, left, went about a mile away across the bridge to a town called Somers Point. Stark contrast as far as the fabrics of these towns. Somers Point had several bars along Bay Avenue, about a mile away from Somers Point. So kids would come and they'd stay over in these boarding houses and rent rooms in Ocean City during the day and then go party at night over in Bay Avenue, there's an old cult classic movie called Eddie and the Cruisers that was actually filmed in part there. At one of the bars. It's no longer there, called Tony March. There's also a traffic circle right over the bridge between Ocean City and Somers Point. The Somers Point traffic circle where the diner is located. That's at Somers Point Diner. 24/7 standing line to get in there back then, because a lot of the bars were all-night operations in addition to the local bars that emptied out at 2:30, so there was always an influx of kids going there. A crowded scene. Susan and Elizabeth go in there, sit down. 3 boys join them. Nothing really uninnocent happened. There was a dispute over the bill, but apparently they wanted to pay the girls' bills. They wouldn't take it. They left, this being the boys, and the girls weren't seen leaving the place. The next thing happens is about an hour later. A state trooper named Louis Sturr is doing his northward loop along the Garden State Parkway, about 2 miles away from the circle, the Somers Point Circle. And he sees a parked, seemingly abandoned light blue Chevrolet convertible, gets out of the car, and notices one straw purse located therein. Its contents undisturbed, decides the car's abandoned. It has a Pennsylvania tag, calls it in through DMV, or Division of Motor Vehicles, or Pennsylvania equivalent, and they call in a wrong name, a mistaken name. So he just decides, well, this thing's been abandoned, didn't look any, no skid marks, no one here, no keys in the car, has it towed, and goes on a fishing vacation. 3 days later, he comes back from his fishing vacation, and goes into his station and sees that these girls were reported missing. Their fathers had rented a helicopter. He put 2 and 2 together. The alarms went off. There was a massive search begun at that point, hands and knees, troopers, highway workers, and that was on the afternoon of June the 2nd, which was a Monday. Highway worker Elwood Fonts was the person who stumbled upon the bodies. Sadly, they had been ravaged. Susan was found naked, and Elizabeth was located about 10 feet away, fully clothed except for her underwear. Susan, both had been stabbed repeatedly in the front, chest, and neck area, and that's how they died. All that was found at the scene was a pair of glasses and a dive watch. So that's the brief, truncated version of how the last several hours of their lives unfolded and how they were found.
And over the course of decades, really, nothing is any closer. Not even with CODIS or anything, huh?
Well, it's interesting, and this what sort of got me interested into the whole thing was, no, you're right, I should say. Nothing has that. About 2011, again, I've been researching this for so long in preparation for my first book, The Origins of Infamy, which is a fictionalized version of the same case, and then, of course, the Garden State Parkway Murders. The New Jersey State Police are extraordinarily reluctant to divulge anything but the most basic and publicly available details. They're just not allowed to do so. By law, the Open Public Record Act, which is the New Jersey equivalent of the federal FOIA Act, prohibits open investigations from being discussed. So they wouldn't tell me anything. The one guy did tell me that when I asked him about the DNA, he said, quote, "We have nothing," unquote. So I gathered from that they never were able to determine definitively whether there had been any sort of sexual assault. I don't believe there was, based upon how the bodies were found.
So they said that that Susan was raped, but do they think
they were never able to definitively determine either of them had been raped. I never thought they were. Because of the level of decomposition, they weren't able to determine that. I don't happen to think they were. First of all, without getting into whether one or two people did it, I don't think a person, I don't know how you are able to do that. This is one of the other things that's always struck me odd about the case is that the murders occurred when it was broad daylight. People automatically assume that because it was like 6:30 in the morning, according to the coroner's report, this happened, that it was dark out. It wasn't. It was daylight at 5:29 a.m. on that date. So this happened in broad daylight. Now, what person decides to, either whether a hitchhiker or a person that pulled them over, decide to sexually assault two women 200 feet in from the Garden State Parkway, northbound lanes, a major highway. So I just frankly don't think there would be time to do something so atrocious.
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, when I read your book, I started going through different scenarios, and I kept feeling like it was more than one person. Or it was a case of, I've always had this thought that serial killers likely brag to each other. Like, I just picture some sort of camaraderie, and maybe like Bundy did this and showed Thomas, or Thomas did this and showed Stanos, or Stano. I'm not sure what it is. Stano, yeah. Or something like that. But the nature of it, I thought, Mel, either somebody got knocked out and picked up. Like Elizabeth got knocked out, picked up, and taken to the tree and bound, and then Susan was dealt with. I mean, fear does weird things to people, firstly. Secondly, insanity does weird things to people. So it might not be that a killer would have the wherewithal to think, oh, this is broad daylight, I don't have a lot of time, whatever, because they're operating on this lizard brain thing. They're not operating in a common sense thing. Although I think Ted Bundy is probably a little bit more strategic. When he actually performed his acts, he was psycho, right? He was enraged. Yeah. He overkilled.
Right. Well, what always struck me as interesting, well, I should say it's a certainty in my opinion here, was you're exactly right. It seems axiomatic. Yeah, the person obviously had a mental problem, whoever did it. However, I've always suspected that not only do they have a predisposition toward that, but these circumstances lent themselves to him acting in this way. For example, it happened at 6:30 a.m. on a holiday weekend near bars. Two of the bars, I should specify, the Dunes and another place called the Attic, had just let out. So I don't think a serial killer wakes up at 6:30 in the morning and says, I think I'm going to go kill two people. Typically they operate at night, right? So this person was probably...
Ted Bundy didn't. Ted Bundy operated all the time, at all times.
But I tend to think that this person had whatever, bipolar disease, something that went undiagnosed, combined with, I surmise, drugs, alcohol. In any event, he had been up all night. Now, have you ever been up all night? It's a very strange and not necessarily good feeling. You feel there's certain regretful feelings, sort of guilt. I know I did it once or twice in college, and I remember seeing people going about their business, clean and showered on their way to class, and thinking, there's something not quite right about this, and you're not quite in your right frame of mind. Now, combine that with a person who's otherwise not necessarily all there, and you can see how it'd be the perfect recipe for someone like that to do this, serial killer or otherwise.
I thought maybe because the girls had breakfast, they were on their way, and, they're young and not maybe thinking with forethought, and I could see them having to use the bathroom, and say, let's pull over. There's a little bank of trees over here. We'll go into the woods, and who knows? Somebody may have seen that and pulled over. Somebody sometimes these are just motives of opportunity, as they say.
Absolutely. But here's the thing, and again, it takes you in 80 different directions.
I know. It's fascinating.
That's part of the compelling thing about it. It's a perfect murder in so many different ways. But so Susan's straw purse is found in the car undisturbed. Elizabeth's is found next to her body. Okay? Now that suggests to me, well, there wasn't a hitchhiker in my opinion. So that suggests to me whoever pulled them over under whatever ruse obviously got one of them to go into the woods, on her own volition.
Was she on her period? Do they know?
I don't know.
Because if a woman is on her period, she's going to take her bag with her because maybe she's like, oh crap, I've got to change my tampon, or, who knows? Yeah. There's just, and the fact that Elizabeth wasn't wearing underwear, I thought, well, do they know for sure she wore underwear? And then I think when I'm on holiday, sometimes you run out of underwear, and on the way home, you're like, fuck it, I'm going commando.
Right, going commando. But my thought was, if a person pulls them over, he said, you take, let's say it was a person, which very likely could have happened, one of these, I want to be a cop, but I'm actually a sociopath with the fake siren. You pull two girls over, you come with me. You don't say a word. Come into the woods, or I will come into the woods, I want to show you something, there's an emergency. She goes in and is swiftly murdered. And at this point, Susan's wondering what happened. What happened? I'm sitting here. I've got to go check on my friends. She left her purse there, which I thought was just a strange thing. First of all, why would you bring the purse into the woods? You've said a scenario. I never really contemplated that, but obviously Susan felt safe enough leaving her purse there on the side of the highway in order to go into the woods. So I've always thought that was a strange thing, unless the opposite occurred. Susan was held at knife point or whatever, or a gun to her. She just left her purse there in the woods. But if that were the case, why would Elizabeth go in and there with her purse? Why wouldn't she just leave it there? She's going to check on her friend's life, in other words.
Yeah, and the police said that there wasn't really signs of struggle, which I also found curious, which made me think that they went in the woods to pee.
Yeah.
And that they were overtaken, and the fact that one is naked, the other is not. The one who's naked, Susan, fits the look that serial killers seem to favor in those days, specifically Ted Bundy. They were beaten about the torso as well as stabbed. Beaten about the torso and stabbed to death. That's correct. And an overkill. So it's clearly something that doesn't like women. Obviously, has issues with that. The neatly folded you talk about the neatly folded clothing, and you bring that up later in the book with other suspects. That's a really specific thing to do. It's not a Ted Bundy thing to do, certainly. Yeah. That's a very specific.
Exactly, and not strewn about. So there, again, the clothes are there, and they're up, but then obviously he was fearful of getting caught when he concealed both of the bodies. But if you look up, you're referencing overkill, and that terminology was used, I think, in the late 80s to early 90s to characterize the motivations of serial killers based upon the crime scene, etc. And what had always struck me as fascinating about this case, and I looked up the charts on, examples of overkill the organized and the disorganized serial killer and their propensities to overkill. And both were there. I mean, that's what was so odd to me, is that, without getting into, what's classified as each, but typically I think an organized serial killer would use a car in the commission of a crime, but he'd be very neat when he left. And, this person obviously threw the keys away 2 miles down the road. And the other strange thing, because these serial killers lived signatures, and they were signatures. Look, if a bra being tied in a girl's hair is a signature, that's not necessary for the completion of the crime. There's just no doubt about it. That would suggest it has to be a serial killer or someone, again, who is completely in another element. But the strange thing about this is there was that other car that was there, the the tan Mustang with 3 boys who were sleeping. When they woke from they had been drinking all night long. When they woke, Susan's car was there. So whoever pulled them over did so in the presence of these 3 boys who were sleeping, and subsequently passed lie detectors tests. And one serial killer expert with whom I spoke said there's no way a serial killer would do that, despite every other indicia suggesting that it was his handiwork with the bra, because the second they see someone, they fear getting caught. That's paramount. They don't do, and then the second they sense that could happen, he said any serial killer would take off once he saw that car there, unless he had entered that zone where there was no return from. And they do have a zone like that. It's a blitz attack. They can't stop.
Mm-hmm. And I've just this is a fascinating subject to me. So I've read about a lot of serial killers, and some say the Zodiac killer or the BTK killer, who is almost requesting being caught, enticing, saying, look, here are the clues. It becomes a cat and mouse game. I think when, for example, Ted Bundy, at the end of his life, before execution, I think he got off on knowing that he could manipulate people's emotions. Even when I was reading, because they were trying to get him to confess to things or talk about cases and such, I think he enjoyed that. He's a narcissist, and he enjoyed the attention. But even how they mentioned as Ted Bundy is being taken to the electric chair and his behavior, a part of me, because I've actually been in the presence of a sociopath, and they will go from happy to sad just to get a reaction from the room, or you know what I mean? So I could see a Ted Bundy playing to the crowd, Oscar-winning moment,
Well, the thing was fascinating about Bundy's remarks regarding the Garden State Parkway murders is that, in 1986, he had spoken with a psychologist named Art Norman, and this information didn't become available until right after his execution because of the Hippocratic Oath. He didn't feel comfortable divulging it, this being Dr. Norman. He said it was at Halloween in 1986. Bundy was, he said, just going off on a tangent down memory lane, and said, speaking in the third person, it was the end of the semester, and he didn't have a whole lot to do, so he wound up going to the shore or the beach, running around there for a few days, and saw some girls lined up on the beach, picked them up, and it wound up being the first time that he did it. So when he escaped when he left for California after, it was more like an escape. It was taboo. He never had that experience. So then, the day before Bundy was executed, in his penultimate remarks, an interview with Dr. Dorothy Lewis, she gave him free rein to discuss anything he wanted to. And out of nowhere, he pulls from his mind Ocean City. And, his words were, I was in Ocean City, and I did go around that boardwalk area, that small resort community, for a few days. I just want to emphasize, I tried to abduct a woman. I did not kill her, though. I just thought that was just strange how in those two scenarios, no one prompted him or asked him in those moments, where that came from. But the facts matched up entirely because he was in Temple University. There were two girls killed ashore. And what I uncovered in my book, after having an interview with his aunt, is that his maternal side did have a family house in the Ocean City area. No one knew that. She said it was on 26th Street, and she did mention that it's not too far from where Princess Grace had her place. So she was their most famous resident. So I just thought that was fascinating. That certainly would have provided him ample opportunity to scope out the area if those were his intentions. So to the extent that serial killers operate locally, and about 3/4 of them too, they kill within the state they reside or a neighboring state. Yeah. So that's not the. So the more famous ones are, the transit ones. Again, ironically, like Bundy and so forth, but it doesn't always work that way. Most of them are local.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you hunt in your grounds.
Yes.
There's a couple things. The watch, the diver watch, and of course you bring up the connection with the diver watch, and it was who was the Ronnie Walden. He was the diver, who also had a crazy temper. It is quite fascinating how many people could be sort of shoved into the scenario of being of who had done it. It's still, to me, I feel, after I read the book, I thought, okay, Thomas and Stano, Thomas and Stano, they worked together somehow, and boy, Thomas is a real piece of work, Mark Thomas.
Well, yeah, my discovery of him was fascinating because when I had first started reading into the case, this is going back to about 2000, in preparation for the Origins of Infamy, I of course read the newspaper articles, and for the first week, all they kept referring to was, and they called him an 18-year-old hippie type from Norristown, Pennsylvania, and I didn't know. I was like, who is this person? I mean, for years I couldn't figure it out, and then I was at, coincidentally, Temple University in an archives room and came across his name because it was so common a name. I didn't, feel the need to really Google it, but I did a couple years later, and boom, I matched it up with this person based upon the age, and he did go on to a life of crime. I've always said, though, and I'll say it, publicly and privately this day, I don't think he killed those girls. There was nothing about his life would suggest a predisposition toward violent behavior like that. He was always one of those guys who would just be near the flame but not get burnt. However, again, this is exclusive information that I put in the book, was that no one really knew the connection, or that he lived nearby Gerald Stano. The police I talked to in Pennsylvania about this matter said that Thomas, although he knew Gerald, the serial killer, who wasn't a serial killer back then, again, lived a mile away from him, was friendly with Roger, who was Gerald's younger brother, who's since deceased. So that seems to be the most intriguing aspect of the entire investigation.
Stano is a nutter, for sure. Yeah. Excuse me. And the thing about the folding of the clothes, which is so specific, and I thought, well, what if Stano killed them, and then he's buddies with Thomas, and he's like, hey, I did this thing, come check it out, especially 3 days go by. Talk about, it was really interesting to me that the police were like, oh, this is someone that has a knowledge of chemistry. And I thought, no, he's just a lucky break for a bad guy.
That's exactly what it was. And that scenario is more in line with my thinking. I've suspected that Mark probably knows more that he is telling with respect to that relationship. But, I spoke with him a couple years ago. And again, not giving away too much of the book. You probably want to delve into that whole thing. But you do bring up a very plausible scenario. But Gerald was a bad kid from Jump Street. And Gerald was born under just horrible circumstances. He was adopted. He had been abused terribly as a kid. In fact, his adoptive parents were warned by the agency up in Schenectady, New York, where he was born. The kid was unadoptable because of what he had been through, like wallowing in his own feces and abuse, just stuff I didn't even include in there. This happened to him, and he was a juvenile delinquent along with his adopted brother, Roger. They had spent time in Philadelphia. In fact, they were both juvenile delinquents, and I was never able to speak with, and I thought it was sort of interesting, the juvenile officer who oversaw one or two of them. He's still alive. He just never returned my calls. I was trying to, plumb that connection to see if he knew anything about whether there was official files on the Stano connection to it all. So,
Ted Bundy strikes me as the kind of man who would research other serial killers and other murders and have a vast knowledge. And I just think he liked to fuck with people. I really do. I think
they all like to fuck with people.
Yeah. So, and, he wasn't a stupid man. And I think that, he knows talking in the third person would get somebody's attention. He just, I know that, for God's sakes. And I'm not a serial killer. If my brain is twisted to a point where I'm just trying to antagonize, and then to me, it seems, and this is just my own theory, if I'm a serial killer, I have murdered people, I have, my thing that I do, and that these people are trying to get me to maybe somehow admit to other crimes that I haven't been attached to, I will probably have that same weird little dopamine kick in my brain just with the idea that they think I killed somebody.
Oh yeah, well, it all comes down. They do this. They're narcissists.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to the extent that narcissism is a trait in the diagnostic statistic, whatever that medical thing is, it's a trait. Narcissism is a trait of a person who's sociopathic. So these people are all narcissists. They really get a rise out of the attention. And it wasn't just Bundy. It was, the BTK killer.
Oh, man.
He's a piece of work.
Yeah.
And the guy there's a guy named Richard Cottingham who's suddenly divulging more names of persons who dismembered prostitutes, but had also killed a number of women up in northern New Jersey.
Is that the guy that they say killed over 100 women?
No, that's Little, Samuel Little.
Oh, okay.
I think he's out in your neck of the woods, or was. But they do all enjoy, the conversations. One of the serial killer experts that I spoke with said that the big thing about them is that they confabulate. And in other words, they'll wrap the truth around lies and wrap the lies around truth. They'll plant a kernel of something that they know within another lie and sort of sit there and watch as the authorities, whoever's interviewing them, just try to discern what's truth and what's fact. And you're absolutely correct. That's the thing. They just enjoy the attention. Now, the thing is with Bundy, that game carried forth for a while. But I did interview one of the jailers that escorted him to death row. And he said this was the first guy that he had ever taken whose legs buckled from beneath him when he was carried into the chair, so he couldn't even walk. He was so terrified. So there is a point where reality kicks in, and these guys will say anything in order to stay alive.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess, again, I wasn't there, so I have no idea, but the whole Bundy thing is fascinating too, just watching the footage of the execution day and to see the pandemonium outside and the chants and and I think, God, we really haven't come very far from the, public hangings in the square where people get all fired up and...
No, you're right. It was a carnivalesque atmosphere.
So creepy.
Yeah. Opportunistic hucksters were everywhere selling replicas of the chair, and I do see that quite frequently. I guess they could justify their behavior because this person was getting ready to die, but you're right, you can't help it.
I think it puts them in line. I mean, obviously they're not out there killing people, but in a way that fever pitch that they're feeling, they're actually tapping into the same thing that the serial killer is feeling. I don't know that they're aware of it, but that's exactly what they're doing.
What's the name of that German expression? Schadenfreude?
Yeah, Freud. I know it ends with Freud. Yeah. Everything ends with Freud, you know.
It does. That's exactly right.
Let's. I am curious well, I want them to hear, the audience to hear, your childhood moment that stuck with you, that then brought you back to that space when you decided to write the books.
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, I was grew up in an upper middle class suburb where we had yards and paved streets, and we had a swim club, things along those lines. We had if we wanted to play tennis, there was a tennis court. They weren't in our backyards, not that type of place, but very suburban America. There were no woods. So once, we would always vacation to the Jersey Shore because my step-grandfather had a house in a town called Stone Harbor, New Jersey, which is about 20 miles south of Ocean City. My parents actually met in Summers Point, about 200 yards from the Summers Point diner. I always thought that was strangely ironic, spiritual, all that stuff. But when I was a kid, so that we drive north on these trips along the Parkway, and I'd always just look out into the woods because a lot of it's protected land, and you just see woods and woods and woods. And I remember driving and my mom just turning to my dad and saying, "They never found out who killed those girls." And I just perked up and said, "What do you mean?" And they talked about the case and just vaguely pointed to the area, and I had heard these two girls got murdered in the woods and that a state police trailer had been put in the woods. That didn't turn out to be true. That was my dad's recollection of it, because this killer always returns to the scene of the crime. And that just hung with me. And then in 1993, when I was figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, there was an article in the New Philadelphia Inquirer, and the writer had interviewed at length Richard Larson, who had penned the other biography of Ted Bundy called The Stranger Beside Me, which would become a movie actually with Mark Harmon. And he opined that these Garden State Parkway murders of Susan Davis and Elizabeth Perry were Ted's first. And he had referenced, obviously, the remarks that Ted had made. And that stuck with me as very interesting, but it wasn't until I had taken a writer's course at summer at Rutgers University several years later, and I was searching my mind for a short story that I thought of the case, and it came back to me again. And that's where everything took off. I just obsessed over it. I was never able to let it go. For whatever reasons, I just found it extraordinarily fascinating that this occurred. So that was the genesis of it. And I'm fascinated with cold cases from a particular era anyway, from sort of late 60s to the late 70s. I don't know why, but I am.
A lot of serial killers during that time. It's a very prolific time for serial killers. 1974 was the golden, they called the golden age. That's when Bundy began killing. That was a lot of these murders up in North Jersey occurred during that time period as well. And it's interesting, I mentioned earlier that when Bundy was in Philadelphia with his aunt, he had indicated that during that time period when he was at Temple on the weekends, he would go north to Times Square. And he had always consistently said that pornography was at the root of his behavior. And he said he would see these movies and whatnot. And it was during one of those trips where he had reached a peak that he had to act out. He called it his entity. And that's another thing that lends itself to the consistency that he may have been involved in these Garden State Parkway murders, because he had gone to the Jersey Shore afterward, sort of as a release, of all this pornographic stuff that he had seen with the Grinder films. You see Taxi Driver, Midnight Cowboy, all those movies really accurately depict what a hellhole it was back then before it was Disney-fied in the early 90s. Times Square was a lurid place. And he wasn't the only serial killer to claim pornography as a malevolent influence. There was also the BTK guys did the same thing. He would read True Detective magazines and see these sort of graphic depictions of women in bondage, about to be assaulted and so forth. It was very disturbing
disturbingly titillating way of marketing, and those magazines are mercifully no longer in print.
Do you ever have you, how do I put this, during the course of all of this, have you been visited by Elizabeth and Susan at all, you think?
No, yeah, I think several things happen. Each Memorial Day, the advent of Memorial Day, I will always inevitably see the same type of car. I will see that light blue, as a marina blue 1966 Chevrolet SS convertible with the top down. I will see it, and I'll think to myself, it won't always be blue, but it's blue most of the times. And I'm like, wait a second, I was just thinking about this case. There it is. Are they trying to speak with me? You know, when I first visited the crime scene, I noticed the existence of crows up above in the trees, and I never knew any spiritual significance was attached to crows until sometime later, when, now going all the way to the end of the story, I was writing the afterword to my book and heard crows outside. So let me look this up. And then I started to say, wow, crows mean a lot of things. They sort of can carry messages from the afterlife to the present world. So I always thought that was sort of signified that maybe some messages were being conveyed to me by these two to, seek justice for them. So absolutely, I've been directed in some way, shape, or form, some force, to continue with this investigation.
You're certainly a speaker for the dead, and I think it's important that the dead do have, especially those whose voices were stolen from them, that there are warriors giving them a voice. This happened at a time, clearly many of the active serial killers, and some, of course, got away with it, whatever, but many have been put to death. Many have died of old age in prison. It's likely that their murderer or murderers are gone, but you're still speaking for them, which I think is very powerful. I think that's it's something to be proud of.
Thank you.
I think it's important.
Yeah, it is. And, years ago I had gotten a not necessarily kind DM on Facebook from a sibling of one of the victims, and it wasn't very nice or gratifying to hear. I'll put it to you that way. Wasn't pleased that I was investigating the case, and I've always thought to myself, why is that? Why wouldn't you want a person to be investigated to get justice? And then a person that I'm very close with actually was in the news business for a number of years, and she said, look, you're basically tearing open a wound when you do these things, because they may have attained a certain level of closure, and I utterly respect that. And if they want to hate me, that's fine. But it sort of goes back to, I feel like I still have to speak for these girls. It's just as you said, it's voices from the grave. I have to do it.
Absolutely. Who do you think committed the act?
In the book, what I've done is I've narrowed infinite possibilities through research, discussion, case files, interviews, into a number of persons that could have done it. And I sort of end up in twofold, without giving away too much, with a very plausible scenario as to what happened to these girls based upon an interview with a woman who was driving near the scene about a year later. As far as a near abduction, I painted the
woman on the motorcycle?
No, it was a motorcycle. It was actually a dark car.
Oh, okay.
But I've sort of left it open on purpose to the reader. I think it's sort of, when we don't have a trial, I think it's sort of presumptuous for us to, render an opinion on something, unless we're 150% certain that it happened. So I think I've done my duty in narrowing it down. In fact, I even did a profile of whom I thought might have done this. An FBI serial killer profile, and it's pretty interesting because the ages and the ethnicity sort of match up with the suspects. that we have so far. So
it really was fascinating, and it certainly, especially for those of us who are into true crime and consider ourselves amateur sleuths, I took copious notes while reading the book, and I kept going, I have these little lines drawn and, all that kind of thing, and trying to figure out the whodunits of it all.
What's fascinating to me, and there's no reason for this, but it's very interesting, is that women tend to have a sixth sense about people that men don't. And they're also much, much more interested in the true crime. Ironically, in cases like this where there's been such horrible acts committed, they definitely want to seek justice and have been very supportive. But
it's not even about seeking justice. It's also about a feeling of power. I think women who are in society, women are not as powerfully protected as men. When we go out to our cars at night, we have to make sure we have some sort of weapon on us. We're constantly 360 aware of everything going around. We're watching micro movements on faces and waiting for the shoe to drop. And it sucks, but that's just from a very small age. Every woman I know has had some experience with something. And I think that reading this stuff and knowing about the minds of these people that commit these acts, in a way, weirdly, ironically, makes us feel safer because we're learning what to look for.
Right. Absolutely. And so many people have, written to me and said, I think it was this person and this person and this person. It's just interesting to see, who did it and who police. It's interesting to see which people they believe did it. And women have been, I said, like 99% of my supporters, purchasers. It's just really, really fascinating, and it's very encouraging. One of the women who I'd interviewed at length about her conviction that Ronnie Walden had done this, actually sent me a fax. This is how far back that goes, and said, "I know this guy did it." She's like, "I could just feel it," and it was difficult for her to articulate that sixth sense that I think that she as a woman felt. It's just fascinating. Women should be on more cold case units, I think, because they just get this extraneous feel for things. It's just an instinct that men don't have.
And there's just so many scenarios. Maybe, Ronnie committed the crime, and then Thomas and Stanos, I don't know why I can't say his name right, come upon it, and fastidious man that Stanos is, he has to fold the clothes, and who knows? But it's easy to go down the rabbit holes for sure. And now with the familial DNA and all that stuff, there's hope finally for a lot of these cold cases to be solved. Look at the Golden State Killer, and there's been a few.
But there still has to be
DNA.
There still has to be DNA, and although the level of DNA is mercifully winnowing to the point where almost the pinprick top of the needle that is all they need nowadays, there still has to be DNA. So if a serial killer who derives gratification in non-conventional means, if that's what they do, these guys, when they get close and strangle a person or stab them to death, that substitutes for the ejaculation.
Sure.
That's what they do. So if they don't necessarily have sex with this person, but there isn't that evidence left over.
Well, in stabbing, certainly, like a lot of the impotent serial killers, right? Their stabbing was their thing, or
exactly.
Yeah.
I think the strangulation, them as well, because they get to see the suffering.
What happened to the clothing? What happened to the brassiere? Is it in a locker somewhere?
I'm sure it's in the evidence locker.
Well, there's got to be DNA on that. There's got.
You know what? Again, this is what I've discovered. It has been the result of my obsession in talking with detectives, everyone. The official New Jersey State Police investigative file they will not disclose because, again, they're just not going to do it. So we don't know whether there was anything. By virtue of him saying we have nothing, that guy I talked to way back when, I have to conclude that that there was no rape and there is no DNA, because I would hope that what was there had been re-reviewed and retested in the light of our technological advancements.
Yeah, because our skin sloughs off constantly. If they were touched in any manner, and clearly they had to have been.
And what about defense wounds under the fingernails?
Fingernails? Yeah, absolutely.
Now here's another strange one for you. Again, contributing to the strangeness of this all. How is it that 3 boys stay asleep in a car 100 yards from where 2 women are murdered and don't get woken? That's always struck me as odd as well.
Drunk. Very drunk.
Very drunk. But isn't there a part of your mind remember, I used to live in Los Angeles. I remember one night about 2 a.m, I heard someone trying to key into my apartment. Because in Los Angeles, they have those gates in front of the houses. I just heard that echoing, and immediately I woke up. Because there's a part of us that just attunes you to bad things about to happen.
But that's when you might have been in danger. For 3 boys drunk who are not in danger, then they may not have.
Right. I think it was an ex-girlfriend too, by the way. She never fessed up to it though.
Well, there you go. So, and that's, I think, speaks to intuition as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I don't know. By the way, I did find their names and attempted to contact each of them. And ironically, they all live in the very same area they did 50 years ago, and none of them returned my calls or answered my messages. So, but I can't form any judgment as to that, because who wants to be associated with something like that with people with families and grandkids? But it was just interesting as all.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case, and it's a great book. And I haven't read The Origins of Infamy.
Okay.
That you wrote in 2009. Yes.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and that's, again, you said the fictionalized account. How can people find your books?
On Amazon. Both are available. The Origins of Infamy, as well as the Garden State Parkway Murders, a cold case mystery. Both are available in Kindle and print form on Amazon, and both are available at print form at a terrific bookstore in Ocean City, New Jersey, on Asbury Avenue, called Sun Rose Words and Music, owned by Raj Shiflin and Nancy Miller. They've been phenomenally supportive, even going back to the first book, holding signings, and just delightful people who, because of their age and being from Ocean City, remembered the case so well and are doing whatever they can to support the sales of the book and trying to get this thing solved.
There was a part, I'll put links to, by the way, on heyhumanpodcast.com so people can find it easily. There was a moment in the book that I just thought was such a beautiful thing when you were talking about the Reverend whose son, and I don't want to give it away, but whose son was suicidal. And that thing that happened, I just thought was so beautiful and tragic and sad, but lovely at the same time.
Yes. Well, I felt it was necessary scene because I had to give a window into the suffering that these poor people have endured. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was interesting, and I thought the Reverend's way of dealing with that and the issues with his own son were very poignant and very instructive. And I completely agree with you.
Yeah, it's really well done. I appreciate your time. Thank you. And thank you for sending the book and the lovely inscription. And just, I appreciate you letting me guess who might have done it. It's fascinating. It really is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
I think Susan and Elizabeth would be very happy to know that you're continuing to get their story out there, even if it's, I'm sure, harsh for their families. I can't imagine that loss, but I do think it is important to, as I said, be a speaker for the dead.
Yes. Thank you. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah. Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening. Rate and review Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, and stay safe, be well, keep going.